The sun hadn't yet risen over Charleston, West Virginia, when Detective Sarah Hoffman stepped out of her unmarked sedan, her breath puffing in the crisp January air. It was 6:47 a.m. on January 15th, 2020. Behind her, 6 more vehicles rolled to a stop along the quiet suburban street. Tactical units, FBI agents, forensic specialists, all assembled for one man. The house in front of them could have been any other on Maple Ridge Drive. A modest 2-story colonial with an American flag waving from the porch. A kid's basketball hoop leaning slightly in the driveway. It was the kind of house where neighbors borrowed sugar, waved hello, and felt safe. But Hoffman knew better. In her jacket pocket, she carried an arrest warrant that had taken 21 years to secure. A warrant that would shatter the calm of this Tuesday morning and shake a community that thought they knew the man inside. Across the street, curtains rustled, a dog barked, a porch light flickered on. Neighbors had no idea they were living 3 doors down from a monster. Hoffman's hand hovered near her sidearm, not drawn, just ready, as her team fanned out around the property. Every exit covered, no chances, not after 2 decades of waiting. She approached the front door, warrant in hand, and knocked. 3 firm strikes that echoed down the block like a warning. The door opened 30 seconds later. A middle-aged man in a bathrobe and holding a coffee mug stared at her, his face scrunched in confusion. He was unremarkable. A husband, a father, a neighbor people trusted. Travis Woodward. Hoffman's voice cut through the quiet dawn. "Yes. What's this about?" he asked. "You're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Ila and Norah Charles." The mug slipped from his grasp, hitting the doorstep with a loud crash. Coffee pooled across the concrete like spilled blood. And just like that, 21 years of hiding were over. But to understand how we got here, how a man could live in plain sight for more than 2 decades while a community carried an open wound, we have to go back. Way back to May 14th, 1999. A sunny spring morning where 2 11-year-old girls climbed onto a yellow school bus, full of excitement for a field trip they would never return from. But before I begin, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people around you. And go ahead, drop a comment now. Where are you watching from? May 14th, 1999, dawned like any other Friday in Huntington, West Virginia, the kind of morning where everything felt right. Temperatures climbing into the mid-70s, birds singing, families getting ready for the day ahead. At the Charles home on Willow Street, twins Ila and Norah, age 11, were up a lot earlier than usual. But this wasn't just any school day. It was the field trip they'd been counting down for 3 straight weeks. First into the kitchen burst Ila, her dark curly hair still damp from her shower, her favorite purple windbreaker, and the new sneakers she'd begged her parents to buy. She was the bold one, the leader, the twin who spoke first, made decisions fast, and never met a stranger. Her ambition? She would be a veterinarian. Her bedroom walls were plastered with pictures of dogs, horses, and dolphins. Every weekend she volunteered at the local animal shelter, much to her mother's pride. "Mom, did you pack the sandwiches?" "Turkey, not ham, right?" "Norah hates ham," Ila said in a high-speed rush, already rummaging through the backpack on the counter. Norah came 30 seconds later, quieter, more reserved. Her light pink hoodie and jeans were accented by her identical curly hair, pulled neatly into a ponytail. If Ila dove headfirst, Norah watched and thought it out. She was the question-asking twin, the one who wanted to know how it worked. Her teachers said she had a gift for math and science. She kept a journal full of plant sketches and notes about nature. One day she thought she might be a botanist or an artist. She wasn't sure yet. "I don't hate ham," Norah said with a soft smile. "I just like turkey better." Their mother, Patricia Charles, laughed from her spot by the stove, flipping pancakes. Patricia, 36, was a nurse at Cabell Huntington Hospital. She'd taken the morning off just to see her daughters off on this big adventure. Both backpacks were carefully packed. Turkey sandwiches, apple slices, granola bars, juice boxes, and, tucked in the front pocket, their permission slips. Turning back to the girls, spatula in hand, she reminded them, "You both have your buddy tags." The school had started a buddy system for field trips. each student paired with a partner, sticking together the whole time. Naturally, Ila and Norah were each other's buddies. "Right here," the twins chimed in unison, holding up the laminated tags clipped to their backpacks. Mark Charles entered, coffee mug in hand, dressed for a day on the construction site. 40 years old, solid from years of hard work, the kind of dad who never missed a school event, coached Little League on weekends, and could fix anything that broke. "My girls ready for the big nature adventure?" He grinned, ruffling their hair. "Dad, you're messing up my hair," Ila protested, but she was smiling. "We're studying West Virginia ecosystems," Norah said, her face lighting up. "Mrs. Robertson said we might see deer, and there are supposed to be a bunch of wildflowers blooming. I even brought my journal to sketch them." 15-year-old Jordan shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, his hair sticking every which way. "You guys are way too excited about looking at trees." "You're just jealous because you have to sit in boring high school classes all day," he teased. Ila shot back. Jordan grabbed a pancake with his bare hand, ignoring their mother's disapproving glance. "Have fun with the bugs and dirt, dorks," he said affectionately. Despite the teasing, Jordan was fiercely protective of his little sisters. He'd once fought a kid in 7th grade who made fun of Norah's glasses, suspension for 3 days, parental lectures included. But Patricia and Mark knew his heart was in the right place. Breakfast was noisy, like all breakfasts are when there are 3 kids in the house. Syrup spilled. Orange juice tipped over. The dog barked to be let out. Patricia reminded the girls for the 3rd time to use the bathroom before they left, and Mark double-checked the weather forecast, making sure no storms were forecasted. At 7:45 a.m., the family piled into Mark's Ford pickup, all 5 of them squeezed into the cab for the short 10-minute drive to Huntington Elementary. The school parking lot was already abuzz with activity. 43 6th graders were milling near the curb, bouncing with excitement. 4 teachers checked clipboards, counting heads and distributing name tags. 2 parent volunteers, Mrs. Karen Mendes and Mr. Robert Flynn, helped load supplies onto the bus. 3 yellow school buses sat idling, though only one was needed today. The bus would be driven by Gene Morrison, a 62-year-old veteran who for the last 27 years had ferried Huntington kids around. Patricia hugged both girls tight, perhaps a little longer than usual. "Be safe. Listen to your teachers. Stay with your buddy at all times." "Mom, we know," Ila said, hugging back just as fiercely. "Love you," Norah whispered. Mark knelt down to their level. "Look out for each other, okay? That's what twins do." "We will, Dad," they promised. Jordan gave them an awkward side hug. "Try not to fall in a creek or something." The last image Patricia carried that morning, the one that would haunt her for 21 years, was of watching both girls climb onto that bus. Ila bounded up the steps, energy bursting from every movement. Norah paused at the top, turned back and waved one more time. Patricia waved back. She had no idea it would be the last time she'd ever see them alive. At 8:15 a.m., sharp, the bus pulled out of the Huntington Elementary playground, full of 11-year-olds on an expedition to Lubbock State Park. The teachers had clipboards with emergency contacts, parent volunteers held first aid kits, and everyone had followed protocol. Around 2,300 acres of forest, trails, creeks, and wildlife habitats of Lubbock State Park served as an ideal outdoor classroom in which to study West Virginia's ecosystems. The school had reserved the Oak Ridge Trail area and 2 picnic pavilions for the day. The bus rolled through the park entrance at 8:47 a.m. Ranger Tom Patterson waved them through, expecting them. The park usually hosts school groups during spring. 43 6th graders came pouring off the bus, immediately enveloped by the towering trees and the chorus of birdsong echoing through the forest. "All right, everyone," called Mrs. Danielle Robertson, clapping her hands. "Grab your buddy and line up in your assigned groups." Ila grasped Norah's hand. They were in Group 3, altogether 10 students, supervised by Mrs. Robertson, and ready to start their long-awaited day. The morning was perfect. 74 degrees, sunny, with a light breeze rustling through the oak and maple trees. No one noticed the maintenance truck parked near the trail entrance. No one paid attention to the man in the work uniform quietly watching the students unload. Why would they? He worked there. He belonged. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. By 10:30 a.m., the nature trail hike got underway. Mrs. Robertson convened Group 3 at the trailhead, 10 sixth graders in all, Ila and Norah among them, each one of them wearing their buddy tags and carrying a backpack. The plan was straightforward enough. A 2-hour guided hike along the Oak Ridge Trail with scheduled stops to observe plant life, identify trees, and learn about the local ecosystem. Stay with your buddy at all times, Mrs. Robertson reminded them, for what felt like the 100th time. If you need to stop, bathroom, tie your shoe, whatever, tell me first. Nobody wanders off. Understood? A chorus of, "Yes, Mrs. Robertson," echoed back. The trail was well maintained, wide enough for 2 students to walk side by side. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting playful patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. Wildflowers were blooming at the edges, purple violets, white trillium, and yellow trout lilies. Norah immediately pulled out her journal and began sketching. "Look at this one," she whispered, pointing to a cluster of delicate white flowers. Ila barely looked. "That's cool," she said, brushing past. "Jordan doesn't know everything," Norah muttered under her breath, still sketching. The group moved at a leisurely pace, stopping every few minutes while Mrs. Robertson pointed out different trees, white oak, sugar maple, tulip poplar, and explained how to identify them by their leaves and bark. Some kids paid close attention. Others were more interested in finding interesting rocks or spotting birds. By 11:15, they reached the overlook of the Oak Ridge Trail, a scenic viewpoint where the trail opened into a small clearing. Rolling hills dipped and then rose again in the distance. A creek wound through the valley below, and the faint outline of the Appalachian Mountains loomed on the horizon. "All right, 5-minute break," Mrs. Robertson said. "Stay in the clearing, drink some water. We'll head back to the picnic area in a few minutes." The children scattered, some perched on wooden benches while others leaned against the railing to take in the view. A few rummaged through backpacks looking for snacks. Ila and Norah stood near the edge of the clearing, gazing at the valley. "It's so pretty," Norah said softly, still clutching her journal. "Yeah," Ila agreed. Norah looked over at Mrs. Robertson, who was now assisting another student with binoculars. "You should tell Mrs. Robertson." "She's busy, and there's no bathroom up here anyway." Ila looked around. "I'll just go behind those trees real quick. You can see me from here. It's like 20 feet away." Norah hesitated. They were supposed to stay together, but Ila was already moving toward a cluster of thick bushes just off the clearing, barely out of sight. "Ila, wait, I'll be right back." 30 seconds, Norah called softly. She counted in her head. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30. "Ila," she whispered again. No answer. "Come on, Mrs. Robertson's going to notice." Still nothing. Norah took a step closer to where Ila had vanished, her heart racing. "Ila, this isn't funny." She pushed through the bushes, finding nothing but more trees, more forest. Her sister was gone. At 11:47 a.m., Group 3 started to head back toward the picnic area to take their lunch. Mrs. Robertson conducted a quick head count as the kids lined up on the trail. 7, 8, 9. She counted again. "Where are Ila and Norah?" The other students looked around, confused. "They were just here," one boy said. "I saw them at the overlook," another added. Mrs. Robertson's stomach sank. Had anyone seen them leave the clearing? Silence. She raised her voice, trying to keep the panic from showing. "Ila, Norah, if you can hear me, come back right now." Nothing. Just bird song and the rustling of leaves. "Everyone, stay right here. No one move," hands shaking. Mrs. Robertson pulled out her walkie-talkie. "This is Group 3. I have 2 students unaccounted for, Ila and Norah Charles, last seen at the Oak Ridge Overlook approximately 10 minutes ago." The response crackled back immediately. "Copy that. Initiating search protocol. Keep your group together." In a matter of minutes, other teachers and parent volunteers arrived at the overlook. They fanned out, calling the girls' names, checking behind trees, scanning the trail in both directions. "Maybe they headed back to the bus," Mr. Flynn said. "Or went to the bathroom," Mrs. Mendes offered, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. But as 15 minutes stretched into 30, the initial confusion hardened into something far darker. Fear. The call was made at 12:30 p.m. 911, what's your emergency? This is Tom Patterson. Park ranger at Lubeck State Park. We have two missing children, 11-year-old twin girls. They were part of a school field trip and disappeared during a nature hike approximately an hour ago. Search efforts are underway. Yes, ma'am. We have teachers, volunteers, and park staff looking in the immediate area, but we need police and additional resources immediately. Units are being dispatched now. Stay on the line. The Huntington Police Department arrived within 20 minutes. The Cabell County Sheriff's Office joined the effort within 40. By 1:30 p.m., the FBI field office in Charleston had been notified. And at 1:47 p.m., Patricia Charles's cell phone rang. She was halfway through her shift at the hospital. The caller ID read Huntington Elementary. Hello, Mrs. Charles. This is Principal Davidson. I need you to stay calm. Her blood turned to ice. No phone call that starts with "stay calm" ever brings good news. What happened? Are my girls okay? She asked, her voice shaking. There's been an incident at the field trip. Ila and Norah are currently unaccounted for. Police and park rangers are conducting a search right now. The rest of his words turned to white noise. Patricia's knees buckled. A nearby nurse caught her before she hit the floor. What do you mean unaccounted for? Where are my daughter? She screamed, her voice echoing down the hospital corridor. 40 feet up on a construction scaffold, Mark Charles's phone rang. He almost didn't answer. Calls were risky at that height, but something about seeing Patricia's name made him act. He climbed down, heart pounding, and answered. Mark! Her voice cracked, barely recognizable. The girls, they're missing. We have to get to the park now. He didn't remember the drive. Didn't remember dropping his tools, telling his foreman, or running to his truck. The next thing he knew, he was speeding down Route 2 toward Lubeck State Park, Patricia silent beside him, both of them lost for words. Jordan was pulled from 10th grade English by the school counselor, told there was a family emergency, sent to stay with the neighbors, the Hendersons. He sat in their living room, watching TV without seeing it, aware something terrible had happened, but not yet able to grasp how terrible. By 3 p.m., Lubeck State Park had been converted into a command center. 50 volunteers combed the forest, calling the girls' names until their voices were hoarse. K-9 units from the Huntington Police Department arrived, sniffing articles of clothing provided by frantic parents. Park rangers on ATVS covered the wider network of trails. A helicopter from the West Virginia State Police circled overhead. Standing near the command tent, holding each other, were Patricia and Mark. Around them was organized chaos, a sea of strangers searching for their daughters. They're going to find them, Mark whispered, as if saying a prayer. They're smart girls. They stayed together. They're going to be okay. Patricia said nothing. She merely stared into the forest, as if she could will her daughters to walk out of the trees. But as the sun began to dip lower and long shadows stretched across the park, the search teams returned again and again with nothing. Hope began to crack. Somewhere out there in those 2,000 acres of forest, two 11-year-old girls had vanished, and no one knew where or who had taken them. By nightfall on May 14, 1999, Lubeck State Park resembled a military operation. Portable floodlights illuminated the forest. Generators hummed. Radio chatter crackled through the night air. Command tents had been erected near the main parking lot. Maps of the park spread across folding tables, colored pins marking search zones. Everyone knew the first 24 hours were crucial. In child abduction cases, the chances of recovery plummet after that window. Volunteers came in waves, parents from Huntington Elementary, church groups, local businesses that had shut down early so employees could join in. By midnight, more than 200 people were combing the darkness, flashlights slicing through the trees like searchlights. Ila, Norah! The names echoed over and over, a desperate chorus that would continue until dawn. Patricia and Mark refused to leave. They stood near the command tent, drinking coffee they couldn't taste, watching teams deploy and return. Each time a group emerged from the tree line, their hearts stopped, hoping, praying, convinced this would finally be the moment. But every team returned empty-handed. Saturday morning brought reinforcements. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived from the Pittsburgh field office, 6 agents specializing in missing children cases. They brought sophisticated equipment, thermal imaging cameras, advanced communication systems, and decades of experience. Special Agent Linda Vasquez led the federal response. At 43 years, Vasquez was sharp-eyed and had handled more than 100 cases of child abduction. She'd seen the best outcomes and the worst. Pulling Detective Marcus Webb aside, the lead investigator from Huntington PD, a 23-year veteran known for his thoroughness, she asked, "What do we know?" Webb consulted his notes. Last confirmed sighting, 11:15 a.m. yesterday at the Oak Ridge Trail overlook. Teacher did a head count at 11:47. That's a 32-minute window. Witnesses? None. Other kids were scattered around the clearing. No one saw the girls leave or noticed anything unusual. And the teacher? Vasquez asked. Danielle Robertson, Webb said. 28 years old, teaching for 6 years. Clean background. She's devastated. Blames herself. But by all accounts, she followed protocol. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. Abduction or wandered off? Webb hesitated. These are smart 11-year-olds, not toddlers. They knew to stay with the group, and they were together. 2 girls are harder to control than 1. If someone took them, it was planned. We're looking for a predator who knew they'd be here. The weight of the implication hung heavy between them. K-9 units worked the trails, following scent trails that led in multiple directions before fading. The dogs were among the best in the state, but the forest was vast and scents dispersed quickly in open air. Dive teams arrived from Charleston, preparing to search Willow Creek and the 2 small ponds within the park boundaries, a possibility no one wanted to voice but had to be checked. The helicopters made continuous passes, their thermal cameras scanning for heat signatures. But the forest canopy was thick, and if the girls were under heavy cover, or worse, underground, the cameras would detect nothing. By Saturday afternoon, the search radius had expanded 5 miles beyond the park. Volunteers checked abandoned buildings, hunting cabins, storage sheds, anywhere 2 children could hide. The media descended like locusts. News vans from Charleston, Huntington, even Columbus lined the entrance to the park. Reporters gave live updates with the forest as a backdrop, faces grave as they described the desperate search for the missing twins. Cabell County Sheriff Raymond Booker held a press conference at 4 p.m. "We are doing everything in our power to locate Ila and Norah Charles," he said, voice steady despite exhaustion. Over 300 personnel are involved, local and state police, FBI, park rangers, and volunteers. "We will not stop until these girls are home. If anyone has information, please call the tip line." Patricia and Mark stood behind him. Her eyes were red and swollen. Mark's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might break. "Do you believe the girls are still alive?" the reporter shouted. Sheriff Booker's face hardened. "We are operating under the assumption that Ila and Norah are alive. That is our focus. But privately, investigators were already considering darker possibilities. Sunday brought both the breakthrough that everyone had prayed for and the confirmation of everyone's worst fears. At 10:23 a.m., a volunteer searcher, David Hutchkins, was working a section of the Willow Creek Trail, about 1.3 miles from the Oak Ridge overlook. The trail was narrow and less traveled, with thick underbrush on either side. He almost missed it, a flash of pink barely visible beneath a pile of fallen branches. "Hey, I've got something here," he called. In minutes, the investigators arrived. They gingerly took away the branches, observing how they must have been put there on purpose, not fallen naturally. Beneath it lay a small pink backpack with unicorn patches sewn onto the fabric. Detective Webb squatted, tugging on latex gloves, and opened the main compartment gingerly. Inside, a half-full water bottle, a field trip worksheet with Norah Charles, written in tidy script at the top, and an unopened granola bar. A purple pencil case. It was unmistakably Norah's. When Patricia came to identify it, her voice was hollow. "That's her backpack," she whispered. "She had it this morning, when she got on the bus." The location of the backpack was significant. It told the investigators that the girls hadn't strayed far by accident. Someone had taken them on purpose. Willow Creek Trail didn't connect directly to Oak Ridge Trail. To get there, you had to leave the main path and cut through dense forest. The girls wouldn't have ended up there by accident. Someone had brought them, or at least brought the backpack. Everything was photographed by the FBI forensic specialists, The exact placement was documented and soil samples were taken. The backpack was carefully bagged as evidence and rushed to the lab. "Why just the backpack, Sir Wersom?" Mark asked, his voice breaking. "Where are my daughters?" Nobody had an answer, but the discovery renewed the search with a grim hope. If the backpack was here, maybe the girls were nearby. "Maybe they left it as a clue," one investigator said. 50 more searchers concentrated on the Willow Creek Trail area, working their way out in a grid pattern. Cadaver dogs were called out, a prospect nobody wanted to consider, yet couldn't entirely rule out either. They reacted positively at several spots, but every time it ended up being animal remains, deer, raccoons. The forest was full of death, but not the death they were searching for. By Sunday evening, more than 400 volunteers had cycled through the search. Local restaurants donated food, churches organized prayer vigils. The Huntington community was rallying together in a way that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. If not for the horror that had brought them together, Jordan Charles sat in his living room with his aunt and uncle, watching the news coverage, feeling utterly helpless. His parents were still at the park. The house felt empty and wrong without his sister's voices filling it. He couldn't stop thinking about the last thing he'd said to them. "Have fun with the bugs and dirt, dorks." He would give anything to take it back, to say something better, something that mattered. As the week went on and the initial adrenaline-fueled urgency gave way to grim determination, the FBI set up a special tip line. Hundreds of calls came pouring in, possible sightings, theories, suspicions about neighbors. Each was logged and then investigated, leading almost always to a dead end. Forensic analysis of the backpack revealed partial fingerprints on the zipper, smudged too much to provide an identification. The soil samples matched the general park area with no more precise location being determined. No biological evidence, no DNA, nothing pointing to a suspect. Investigators questioned everyone involved with the field trip. Every teacher, every parent, every volunteer, every student, the bus driver, and every park employee who had been working that day. Tom Patterson, the ranger who'd waved the bus through, remembered the morning well. School groups passed through all the time. Nothing seemed unusual, just kids excited about a field trip. "Who else was in the park that day?" Agent Vasquez asked. Patterson checked the entrance log. Maybe 15 other vehicles between 8 a.m. and noon. Mostly hikers, a few fishermen heading to the creek. "We don't require sign-ins, so I can't give you names. Security cameras. There's only one at the entrance. Basic, and it overwrites every 72 hours. The footage was pulled immediately. Grainy black and white images showed vehicles entering and exiting. License plates were run, owners tracked down, and all cleared, except for one vehicle that caught Detective Webb's attention. A white maintenance truck with the West Virginia State Parks logo, entering at 7:52 a.m. "Who was working maintenance that day?" Webb asked. Patterson checked the schedule. "Travis Woodward, one of our contractors. Does repairs, trail maintenance, that sort of thing. Was he here all day?" "As far as I know, his truck was still here when I left at 4 p.m. Webb made a note. "Interview Travis Woodward. Routine. Another name on a long list. Not special. Not yet." By May 20th, 6 days after the disappearance, the search area expanded to a 25-mile radius. State police from 3 counties were involved. The National Guard was contacted about deploying additional resources. But as days went by with no new leads, no sightings, no evidence, there settled over everyone an unspoken truth, like a shroud. Ila and Norah Charles were gone, and whoever had taken them had vanished like smoke. If you are finding this story as compelling as I do me a favor. Hit that like button and drop a comment. What time is it presently in your part of the world? I want to know who's watching this unfold with me. At the end of May of 1999, the huge volunteer search operations scaled back. The reality was brutal but unavoidable. You can't sustain hundreds of searchers indefinitely. People had jobs, families, lives that couldn't remain on hold forever. But the investigation didn't stop. Detective Marcus Webb became the face of the case for Huntington PD. At 52 years old, with 23 years on the force, he'd worked everything from domestic disputes to homicides. But nothing had ever consumed him like this. He couldn't let it go, wouldn't let it go. Every morning he spread the case files across his desk, witness statements, forensic reports, maps marked with search zones, photographs of Ila and Norah smiling at the camera. Two girls who should have been finishing 6th grade, planning their summer, complaining about homework. Instead, they were ghosts. The Behavioral Analysis Unit at the FBI developed a profile of the likely suspect. Agent Vasquez walked Webb through it in early June. Both were running on coffee and determination. Based on the evidence, she explained, tapping the report, we're looking at a stranger abduction scenario. Two victims taken at once suggested confidence and planning. This wasn't opportunistic, it was calculated. What kind of person are we looking for? Vasquez asked. Webb leaned back, thinking. Male, probably between 25 and 45. Familiar with the area, knew the park layout, the trails. Possibly someone who worked there or had a position that allowed him to blend in. Organized, patient. Someone physically capable of controlling two 11-year-old girls and had a plan. So someone who knew they'd be there. Not necessarily, Webb said. Could have been surveilling the park, waiting for the right opportunity. School groups are predictable. They come during spring, follow the same trails, same schedule, but he had to transport them somehow. Two 11-year-old girls don't just vanish into thin air. That means a vehicle. Probably parked somewhere discreet and away from the main areas. Webb pulled out the park map, studying it yet again. Maintenance roads, service access points. If someone knew the park like that, they could move without being noticed. A theory, but theories didn't bring the girls home. The first big focus was to identify all individuals in the Lubbock State Park on May 14th. The entrance camera captured 15 vehicles between 8 a.m. and noon. Every owner was tracked, interviewed, and cleared. Hikers were traced through credit card receipts at nearby gas stations. Park staff, tips from the public, everyone questioned. A 58-year-old retired teacher from Charleston birdwatching, a young couple from Huntington hiking, 3 Marshall University students on a biology project, a fisherman who had been at the creek since dawn. All interviewed, all alibis checked, all cleared. What about someone coming in before 8 a.m., before the camera system turned on? Webb asked Patterson during a follow-up. Ranger Patterson shook his head. The gates are locked until 8. I open them myself every morning. Could someone hike in from outside the park? Technically, yes, he admitted. But it's dense forest, rough terrain. You'd have to know the area really well. Another dead end. The second theory was more painful but necessary. Someone the girls knew. Most child abductions are committed by someone the victim trusts. A family member, family friend, someone with access. Mark and Patricia Charles were interviewed extensively, separately. Their finances examined, backgrounds checked. Both voluntarily submitted to polygraph tests, and both passed. Jordan, the 15-year-old brother of the sisters, was interviewed softly but professionally. Where had he been that day? Did he know anyone showing unusual interest in his sisters? He'd been in high school all day. Dozens of witnesses confirmed. Teachers, classmates, security footage from the school, extended family, all checked. Nothing. The 4 teachers who were along on this field trip were scrutinized, to say the least. Danielle Robertson, Group 3 supervisor, was devastated. She'd barely slept since the disappearance, replaying every moment in her mind. Could she have done something differently? Should she have noticed sooner? Background check, clean. 6 years teaching, glowing recommendations, no complaints. In fact, the other 3 teachers were no different, clean records. Long careers, no red flags. The 2 parent volunteers, Karen Mendes and Robert Flynn, were both investigated thoroughly. Mendes, a stay-at-home mom, was with Group 1 the entire time. Flynn, an accountant and volunteer coach, helped out with Group 2. Both cleared. Gene Morrison, the bus driver, had been driving Huntington students for 27 years. He stayed with the bus the entire time, never entered the trails. Several witnesses confirmed that. Cleared. Every school employee associated with the 6th grade was cleared. Principal, janitor, cafeteria staff, gym teacher. We're running out of people to suspect, Webb told Vasquez in late June. Frustration evident. Then we're missing something, she said. Someone had access to those girls. Someone took them. We just haven't found the connection yet. The theory that the girls ran away had to be considered, but no one believed it. Could two 11-year-old girls voluntarily run away? Investigators dug into their lives. Teachers described them as happy, well-adjusted, good grades, lots of friends, no behavioral issues. Classmates said they were excited about the field trip, talking about it for weeks. Their bedrooms were searched, journals, notes, anything suggesting unhappiness or plans to leave. Nothing. No money, no resources, no motive to run. And even if they did, where would they go? How would they survive 3 weeks without anyone noticing? The theory was officially dismissed. Forensic analysis of the backpack remained the only physical evidence. The pink backpack was examined inch by FBI specialists in Quantico. Partial fingerprints on the zipper, but too smudged to identify. Automated fingerprint identification yielded a partial print, likely from Norah herself, but it was smudged, possibly contaminated by whoever moved the backpack. Soil samples from the backpack matched the general composition of Lubeck State Park: clay, organic matter, trace minerals. Consistent with the park, yes, but too uniform to pinpoint a specific location. Pollen analysis found traces of oak, maple, and wildflowers. Again, consistent with the park, but useless for narrowing down a trail or a hiding spot. No biological evidence, no blood, no hair that didn't belong to Norah, no DNA from an unknown subject. The backpack had been deliberately hidden under branches on Willow Creek Trail, 1.3 miles from where the girls were last seen, but it told investigators nothing about who had put it there or why. It's like whoever did this knew exactly how to avoid leaving evidence, a forensic analyst told Webb over the phone. Webb's gut told him it wasn't luck, it was careful planning. By late July, the case had generated over 800 tips. Each one was logged, investigated, and filed away. A woman in Ohio saying she'd seen two girls matching their description at a rest stop. Footage checked, wrong girls. A man in Kentucky calling to say he had a vision where the bodies were buried. Search teams went, found nothing. An anonymous tip suggesting a registered offender living 30 miles from Huntington. Investigators checked. Work records confirmed he'd been at his job in Charleston all day. Dead end after dead end. Summer 1999 dragged on. Ila and Norah's 12th birthday came and went on July 8th. Patricia baked a cake anyway, lit 12 candles, and sobbed in the kitchen while Mark held her. Leads had dried up, but the case remained active in name only. By August, Detective Webb had interviewed more than 200 people, followed up on hundreds of tips, reviewed thousands of pages of reports, including a brief interview with a maintenance contractor named Travis Woodward, who'd been working at the park that day. Routine questions, routine answers, cooperative, no red flags, cleared. Webb would not realize how wrong he'd been for another 21 years. By September, with the new school year underway and sixth graders filling classrooms at Huntington Elementary, classrooms that should have included Ila and Norah, the case had officially gone cold. Not closed, never closed, but cold. Daily briefings ended. The command center was dismantled. FBI agents went back to their field offices, moving on to other cases, other missing children they could still try to save. Media coverage fell off to the occasional anniversary piece. And yet, for the Charles family, there was no moving on. Patricia took a leave of absence from the hospital, but the weeks turned into months. She couldn't focus. She couldn't function. Every time she saw a girl with curly hair, her heart jumped. Every ringing phone sent her lunging toward it, hoping for news that never came. Severe depression set in, the kind that makes getting out of bed impossible, the kind where happiness becomes a distant memory. Medication, therapy, they helped, but how do you grieve someone who might still be alive? How do you mourn when there's no body, no funeral, no closure? She existed in a terrible limbo, trapped between hope and despair, unable to fully embrace either. Mark coped differently. He threw himself into work, taking every overtime shift he could, staying on construction sites until dark. Physical exhaustion was easier to endure than emotional pain. If he worked hard enough, maybe he wouldn't have to think, wouldn't have to feel. But at night, lying in bed next to his wife, crying herself to sleep, the thoughts came anyway. I should have driven them to the park myself. I should have volunteered to chaperone. I should have kept them home that day. 1,000 should-haves that changed nothing. It almost consumed their marriage. Grief doesn't knit people together the way movies suggest. It isolates. It makes you cruel to the people you love most, simply because they're close enough to hurt. They snapped at each other over nothing, argued about things that didn't matter. They didn't speak for days. Patricia and Mark thought about divorce more than once, but somehow they held on. Maybe because letting go of each other felt like letting go of the girls, like admitting they were really gone. Jordan struggled in his own way. He'd been 15 when his sisters vanished, a sophomore worried about grades, girls, basketball, the normal teenage stuff. Then everything shattered. He watched his parents fall apart, watched his mother stop eating, stop sleeping, stop being his mother, watched his father become a ghost who lived in the house but wasn't really there. And he felt guilty. Guilty for being alive when his sisters might not be. Guilty for the last words he'd said to them. Guilty for being unable to fix any of it. His grades plummeted. He got into fights at school, stupid fights, just to feel something, to make the pain on the outside match the pain on the inside. 2 suspensions later, he started drinking at 17. Nothing serious at first, just beer at parties. But it progressed. By graduation in 2002, weekends were spent drinking, sometimes weekdays too. His parents barely noticed. They were too lost in their own grief. When he was 19, Jordan moved out, taking a warehouse job and renting a cheap apartment. He told himself it was to give his parents space, but really he couldn't stand being in a house where his sisters' bedrooms remained untouched, frozen in time like shrines. The community held a vigil every May 14th. From 2000 onwards, parents from Huntington Elementary organized it at the entrance of the park. Candles lit as the sun set, prayers whispered into the growing darkness. Over 300 attended the first year, while on the 5th year, 50 remained, mostly family, close friends, and a handful of community members who refused to forget. Yellow ribbons were tied onto trees throughout Lubbock State Park, and over time, faded from sun and rain, but no one ever took them down. They had become a silent reminder that 2 girls vanished and nobody knew why. Patricia and Mark went to every vigil, standing together, holding candles that flickered in the wind. Sometimes Patricia spoke. Her voice shook as she thanked people for remembering. Sometimes she couldn't speak at all, and Mark would hold her while she cried. Jordan went the first few years, then stopped. It hurt too much. It felt performative, like mourning people who might still be alive somewhere, waiting for rescue that never came. Detective Marcus Webb retired from Huntington PD in 2005 after 30 years. There were speeches and plaques, congratulations, but he didn't feel like celebrating. He left with the Charles case unsolved. 2 girls still missing, a predator unpunished. Failure, plain and simple. On his last day, he boxed up his desk, including copies of case files he wasn't supposed to take, but no one stopped him. Everyone knew Webb would never let go of this case. At home, he established a small office in a spare bedroom. Files sprawled across the desk, photos and maps pinned to corkboards. He worked, not officially, not with police resources, but as a detective who couldn't accept cold cases, staying cold forever. He reviewed witness statements for the 100th time, reread forensic reports, studied maps until he could navigate Lubbock State Park in his sleep. He kept a list of everyone interviewed in 1999, checking to see if anyone had been arrested for other crimes or if any patterns emerged. Travis Woodward's name was on that list. Webb had noted after their brief interview that the maintenance contractor had been at the park on May 14, 1999. Cooperative, no red flags, nothing to revisit. Not yet. In 2008, the case was featured on a national true crime television show, dramatizing unsolved mysteries to generate tips. Actors portrayed Ila and Norah, the field trip, the disappearance, the desperate search. Patricia and Mark appeared on camera, 10 years older than they should have been, grief etched into every line. If someone knows something, anything, please come forward, Patricia pleaded. We just want to bring our daughters home. The episode generated 43 tips. A woman in Florida called to say she saw the twins at a shopping mall in 2003, but surveillance had been erased. A man in Virginia was sure a neighbor had made suspicious comments about the case. Investigators checked. The neighbor was just a true crime enthusiast with poor social skills. A psychic called, claiming the girls were buried near water under a bridge. Search teams checked every bridge within 50 miles of Huntington. Nothing. By 2010, most people had accepted the terrible truth. Ila and Norah Charles were gone. Their bodies would likely never be found. Their killer would never be caught. The case became one of West Virginia's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Mark and Patricia would live out the rest of their lives never knowing what happened to their daughters. That's what everyone thought. Everybody was wrong, because in 2015, everything would change. A new detective would pick up the file, new technology would emerge, and a cold case that had haunted Huntington for 16 years would at last begin to thaw. In January 2015, the Huntington Police Department hired a new lead detective for their cold case unit, Sarah Hoffman. At 35, Hoffman came with an impressive resume: 8 years in the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children Division, a master's in forensic psychology, and a reputation for being relentless. She had worked cases across the country, from California to Maine, helping to solve 17 cold cases during her tenure. Still, the work had burned her out. Day in, day out, seeing the worst of humanity, case after case of children harmed by those who should have protected them, takes a toll. She needed a change, something that mattered but didn't consume her entirely. Cold cases seemed perfect, still necessary, still justice-oriented, but without the immediate life or death pressure of active investigations. By her first week, Hoffman had asked for all the unsolved cases from the past 20 years. The Charles twins case was on top of the pile. She spent 3 days reading every report, witness statement, and forensic analysis. She studied maps, timelines, and search operations. She read Detective Webb's notes, meticulous, thorough, the work of someone who truly cared. And she saw what everyone else had seen, a case investigated exhaustively, hitting only dead ends. But Hoffman also saw opportunity. 16 years after Ila and Norah disappeared, forensic science had advanced dramatically. DNA analysis techniques that didn't exist in 1999 were now standard. Databases had expanded. Technology had evolved. "What if we retest everything?" she asked her captain in February 2015. Captain Rodriguez leaned back, skeptical. The FBI already tested the evidence, found nothing useful. They used 99 technology. "I know," Hoffman said. "Now we have better tools. Touch DNA, advanced extraction, genetic analysis. It's worth a shot. That costs money. Department budget's tight. I'll find grants. Federal cold case funding, victim advocacy programs. I'll make it work." Rodriguez eyed her for a long moment. "You really think there's something there?" "We owe it to that family to try." He nodded slowly. "All right, but this is in addition to your other cases, not instead of." "Understood." Already scheming her next move, Hoffman left. It took 2 years to secure funding. Grant applications, budget proposals, city council presentations to justify spending on a nearly 2-decade-old case. Hoffman's response never changed. Because Ila and Norah Charles deserve justice. Because their family deserves answers. Because whoever did this might still be out there. The forensic retesting was finally allocated $50,000 in March 2017. The pink backpack had sat in the evidence lockers for 18 years until it was sent to a private lab in Virginia that specialized in cold case analysis. 6 weeks later, the lab director, Dr. Michael Chen, called Hoffman. "Detective Hoffman, we've got something." Her heart jumped. "What did you find?" "Touch DNA, retrieved from the zipper and shoulder straps of the backpack using methods not available in 1999. It's male DNA. None of the previously cleared suspects match it." Hoffman was already at her computer, fingers flying. "Did you run it through CODIS?" "Yes, no match." Her excitement was somewhat dampened. Male DNA, unidentified, no match in classical databases. "Have you considered genetic genealogy?" Hoffman paused. She'd heard of it, the method that had cracked the Golden State Killer case in 2018, using public genealogy websites to trace relatives and build family trees. "Think it could work here?" "It's worth a try. DNA is of good quality. If the suspect has relatives who have uploaded on GED Match or Family Tree DNA, we can build a family tree and work backwards to identify him. How long? Depends on matches and cooperation. Months, maybe years. But it's a shot. Do it. By August 2017, the unidentified male DNA was in the public genealogy databases. Then the waiting started. Hoffman continued working her other cases, but the Charles investigation never left her mind. She visited Mark and Patricia in June 2017, explaining the process and managing expectations. "I can't promise this will lead anywhere," she said, sitting in their living room, where photos of 11-year-old twins filled every surface. "But it's the best chance we've had in years." Patricia, now 54, could have passed for being much older. Gray hair, deep lines around her eyes, the exhaustion of carrying grief for almost 2 decades. "Do you think they're still alive?" she asked quietly. Hoffman had learned not to lie. "No, ma'am. I don't. But I think we can find out what happened. And I think we can find who's responsible." Mark, grayer now at 58 than in the old case photos, nodded slowly. "That's all we want. Just answers. Just to know." "I'm going to do everything I can," Hoffman promised. The first batch of genetic matches arrived in January 2018. Dr. Rebecca Kim, a genetic genealogist working with Hoffman, called to update him. "We've got hits distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins. Nothing close enough for immediate ID, but enough to start building a family tree." "How does this work exactly?" Hoffman asked. "Think of it like a puzzle," Kim said. "Each DNA matches a piece. I trace their family trees backward to find common ancestors. Then we work forward, identifying descendants who match our profile." "What profile?" "Male, age range, geographic location. A person who was in West Virginia in 1999, probably between ages 20 to 50 years old at the time." "How long?" Kim hesitated. 6 to 12 months, meticulous work. Every branch verified through records, obituaries, census data." It wasn't the quick answer Hoffman wanted, but it was progress. Over the next months, Kim spent hundreds of hours tracing family trees, verifying lineages, and building connections from ancestors back to the present. By summer 2018, she had narrowed the DNA matches to 3 family branches, rooted in West Virginia and Southern Ohio. By fall, she had about 40 male descendants in the right age range who could be the source of the DNA. Hoffman cross-referenced this list against that of the 1999 investigation as to who had access to the Lubbock State Park, who lived nearby, who had any connection to the area where the girls disappeared. She reviewed employment records, property records, vehicle registrations, and the original witness list. In December 2018, one name appeared on both lists: Travis Woodward. Age 47, born in Huntington, West Virginia, living in Charleston now, but in 1999, he had lived in Huntington. Employment records confirmed he worked as a maintenance contractor for West Virginia State Parks from 1997 to 2002, including at Lubbock State Park on May 14, 1999. Hoffman pulled Detective Webb's 1999 interview notes. Brief, routine, cooperative. Nothing suspicious. Woodward had been cleared, but now, 19 years hence, his name was on that list of 40 possible genetic matches. Hoffman's instinct screamed. She built the case from January to June 2019. On the surface, Woodward looked normal. Married 22 years, 3 children, active in church, coached baseball. No criminal record. But Hoffman traced his timeline carefully. In 1999, he lived in Huntington, regularly worked Lubbock State Park, and moved to Charleston in 2001. He left the State Parks Department in 2002 to work independently. Hoffman pulled his work schedules. On May 14, 1999, Woodward had clocked in at 7:30 a.m., clocked out at 4:45 p.m., present all day. He had access to maintenance roads, buildings, vehicles, knew the park layout better than almost anyone. He would have seen the school bus arrive and known kids were on the trails. Pieces clicked into place, but it needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed proof. Detective Hoffman knew she was onto something, but knowing and proving were 2 different things. Woodward was one of 40 possible matches, and she needed to confirm him as the source of the DNA without giving him reason to be suspicious. In July 2019, she contacted Marcus Webb, who is now retired and 71 years old. Hoffman explained what she had found. Silence filled the line. "I remember him," Webb finally said. "Talked to him in '99. Seemed normal, cooperative. I had no reason to suspect him. You couldn't have known I had no record, no red flags, and we didn't have the DNA technology back then," Hoffman reassured him. "I should have looked harder," Webb said. "Marcus," Hoffman said, "you did everything right. You worked this case for 6 years. You never gave up." Hoffman and Ramirez approached with caution. The area had not been disturbed in decades. With shovels and excavation tools, the forensic team began carefully clearing underbrush and debris. Hours passed, with tension mounting at every scrape of earth. Finally, they found fragments of clothing, small, faded, unmistakably belonging to children. Further digging showed bones, partially decomposed but preserved enough for forensic testing. Hoffman felt her stomach tighten. She knew before the lab confirmed. Samples were sent immediately. In a week, DNA analysis came back. Ila and Norah Charles. After 20 years, the girls' remains had been found. Hoffman stood silently in the clearing, rain beginning to mist over the site, tears stinging her eyes. This was the confirmation the Charles family had been denied for decades. The relief was bitter. The girls were gone, but finally justice could move forward. With the DNA match from the coffee cup, the blood evidence from the Lubbock State Park Maintenance Building, and now the bodies discovered on Woodward's former property, the district attorney's office prepared charges. Multiple counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and related offenses. Travis Woodward was arrested at his Charleston home in December 2019 without incident. He had no idea the investigation had closed in on him. Decades of ordinary life ending in a single inescapable moment. Confronted with the DNA evidence and results of the luminol, Woodward was silent during questioning. The lawyer for Woodward requested a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, but Hoffman knew the evidence was irrefutable. The trail had gone cold 20 years earlier, but science and dogged detective work had finally caught up to him. To Mark and Patricia Charles, the news was surreal. 20 years of uncertainty and hope and despair and quiet suffering coalesced in that instant. They wept at word of the remains, wept at the arrest, wept for the daughters they had loved and lost. Finally, there would be answers. Finally, justice. Detective Hoffman was tired but determined, considering the long, steep road he had traveled. Patience, persistence, and new technology had reopened a case once considered unsolvable. 20 years of grief, 20 years of questions, now inescapable from truthful realities. The mystery and suffering that had surrounded the case of the Charles twins for so long was no longer cold. This was a triumph of justice pursued, proof that even the most impenetrable shadows could eventually see the light of day. He blinked rapidly, the confusion giving way to something darker: panic, fear, maybe even a flicker of anger. His coffee mug dropped to the porch with a crash, shattering the quiet morning. "No, this isn't," he stammered, words failing him. Hoffman didn't bat an eye. "Everything we need is documented. DNA, the bodies, your presence at the park. You're going to come with us." Woodward stepped backward. His eyes raced to the street, to the tactical officers, to the cars surrounding his home. There was nowhere to go. For the first time in more than 20 years, the walls of his carefully constructed normal life closed in. He raised his hands, trembling slightly. I don't understand. I didn't do..." Hoffman interrupted firmly. "Save it for the court. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Cuffs in hand, officers moved in. Ramirez led him gently but firmly along the side of the house, away from the gathering neighbors, while Hoffman radioed for transport. He said nothing, though his tense body screamed otherwise. As they put him into the unmarked car, Hoffman felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and grim satisfaction. 20 years of unanswered questions, decades of grief for the Charles family, and now the man responsible was behind bars. Neighbors stood in silence as whispers began to travel down Maple Ridge Drive. One shook their head, another clutched their child close. No one could imagine what terrors had been lurking behind such an ordinary, almost mundane facade. Hoffman took a deep breath. "It's over," she whispered. "Not for the world, not yet, but for a family that had waited 20 years for this day." Inside the car, Woodward sat silent, head bowed, the weight of years of secrecy finally crashing down. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke over Charleston, a city waking to the knowledge that justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived. By the middle of the afternoon, the story was leading every local and national newsfeed. Social media was set aflame in shock and outrage. People in Huntington bunched together in small groups, embracing neighbors, some openly weeping, and others merely shaking their heads in utter disbelief. The street where Woodward had lived for decades became a focal point for reporters and curious onlookers. At the Charles family home, Patricia and Mark sat clinging to each other in their lounge, tears streaming down their faces. They had lived in limbo for the last 20 years, and finally the truth had come to light. They did not celebrate. How could they? But relief was palpable. Answers. Closure. The girls' names could finally be spoken without fear that the truth would remain buried. Detective Hoffman gave her first public statement, flanked by Captain Rodriguez and DA Jennifer Morrison. "This has been a painstaking investigation spanning 2 decades," she said. "Thanks to advancements in forensic science, the dedication of past and present investigators, and the persistence of the community and the Charles family, justice has finally been served. Travis Woodward will face the consequences of his actions in a court of law." The arrest triggered renewed hope among the families of other cold case victims. The case was hailed by law enforcement agencies nationwide as a model for the way modern forensic genealogy could bring decades-old crimes to justice. Meanwhile, Woodward sat in silence behind bars, bearing the burden of 20 years' worth of deceit and murder. A world once so intricately constructed and so unimaginably ordinary had come crashing down in one morning. For the Charles family, it didn't erase the grief, but rather gave them the one thing they had been denied for so long, the certainty about what happened to Ila and Norah, along with the knowledge that the man responsible could no longer harm anyone else. Yellow ribbons in Lubbock State Park were replaced, memorials repaired, and community vigils took on a new meaning, not only to mourn lost children, but also to honor justice finally done as the tragedy-scarred city of Huntington began its long process of healing. 20 years of mystery, pain, and unanswered questions had come to an end for Detective Hoffman as she finally arrived at her office that evening, exhausted but unencumbered. She sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the journey from cold case to conviction. The work was far from over, other cases awaited, but for one family, one community, one small corner of West Virginia, justice had prevailed. 12:15 p.m., the transport. After the murders, Woodward didn't leave evidence behind at the building. He used his knowledge of the park and maintenance vehicles to move the bodies without drawing attention. Investigators believe he drove them in a small utility vehicle along service roads to his family's 23-acre property in Wayne County. The remote location allowed him to bury the girls in a shallow grave, hidden among thick underbrush, where they remained undisturbed for 20 years. The prosecution made it clear that Woodward's actions were calculated and premeditated. Every decision he made, from selecting a work site located in a secluded area to exploiting his uniform and knowledge of park routines, showed premeditation. He planned the crime with such patience, aware that children under supervision could be manipulated if he times his moves well enough. Employment records, park maintenance schedules, and blood and remains found on the scene tied it all together. DNA on the backpack, blood in the maintenance building, and the girls' recovered bodies created a clear narrative. Woodward had been hiding in plain sight for decades, living an ordinary life while concealing unimaginable crimes. The jury would later hear testimony by forensic experts about how luminal testing revealed blood spatter patterns, how genetic genealogy linked Woodward's DNA to the backpack, and how forensic anthropologists confirmed the identity of the recovered remains. Every detail spoke to calculated evil. 2 girls abducted, killed, and hidden with chilling efficiency. And yet it was also a story of perseverance, decades of investigative work, technological advances, and the unwavering determination of Detective Hoffman and her team. finally brought closure to a family that had suffered in darkness for over 20 years. The press conference concluded with a reminder. This was a victory for persistence, for science, and for justice. But it was also a solemn moment to honor the lives of Ila and Norah Charles, taken far too soon. Their names would no longer be whispered in uncertainty. They would be remembered, and their killer would finally face accountability. Mark and Patricia Charles issued a statement shortly after the arrest as well. Mark's voice trembled, tears streaming down his face as he read aloud, "After 20 years of not knowing, of hoping and fearing every day, we finally have answers. We finally know what happened to our daughters. Nothing will ever bring them back, but we can now honor their memory and begin to heal." Patricia added, "This nightmare has defined the last 2 decades of our lives. Every birthday, every holiday, every quiet moment was marked by the absence of Ila and Norah. We are grateful to Detective Hoffman, Detective Ramirez, and everyone involved for never giving up. Justice has been served, and now our daughters can rest." For Detective Hoffman, the resolution of the case was bittersweet. She had done what no one else could in 20 years. She brought closure to a grieving family in a haunted town. Yet the horror of what had happened, the methodical cruelty of Woodward, weighed heavily upon her. She spent weeks reviewing every detail to make sure nothing was missed and documented everything for prosecution. Travis Woodward stayed in custody, denied bail, as the prosecution prepared for trial. He was cold, detached, and unrepentant. For the Charles family, however, the arrest marked the beginning of reclaiming a life stolen from them. Though the pain would never fully disappear, the certainty of justice offered a measure of peace. By the middle of 2020, trial preparations were complete. Overwhelming evidence was at hand. DNA, forensic evidence, witness statements, and a reconstructed timeline led prosecutors to be quite convinced that the conviction of Woodward would be a reality. Across Huntington and Charleston, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. After 2 decades of unanswered questions and nightmares, the truth was finally revealed, and the person responsible would face the consequences of his actions. After 3 intense weeks, the closing arguments began on August 4th, 2020. DA Jennifer Morrison spoke first. Her voice was steady, but her tone was charged with emotion. "The evidence is clear. Travis Woodward lured 2 11-year-old girls into his custody under false pretenses, murdered them, and buried them on property he knew would remain hidden. For 21 years, their family lived in unimaginable pain. Today, justice is within your hands." Defense attorney Robert Klein's final statement reminded the jury that Woodward had pleaded not guilty, and he urged them to consider reasonable doubt in the case, but his words fell flat against the mountain of evidence. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Outside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. News crews broadcast live updates, while inside the deliberation room, 12 jurors weighed DNA reports, witness testimony, timelines, and forensic evidence. The verdict was read on August 7, 2020. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis Woodward, guilty on all counts, 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of kidnapping." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Hoffman felt a weight lift from her shoulders but knew this was just the beginning for the Charles family. Sentencing was scheduled for September 21st of 2020. The courtroom was filled with family, friends, investigators, and media. The judge spoke directly to Woodward. "Mr. Woodward, your crimes were calculated, cruel, and have devastated multiple families in this community for more than 2 decades. It is the judgment of this court that you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on both counts of first-degree murder and a consecutive term of 50 years for the kidnapping charges." Mark and Patricia Charles cried in each other's arms, finally able to find some semblance of closure. They would never forget Ila and Norah, but at least they knew the truth, and their daughter's murderer would never harm another child. Detective Sarah Hoffman did not say much as she left the courthouse that day. She had just solved one of her most haunting cases, finally bringing justice to a community after more than 2 decades. To the Charles family, the long nightmare was over. For Huntington and Charleston, the tale of tragedy, persistence, and justice became a testament to the unrelenting pursuit of the truth. Ila and Norah Charles were gone, but their memory would never be forgotten. and for the first time in 21 years, their family could begin to heal. The chapel fell silent after the eulogies, heavy with the weight of 21 years of grief, finally finding some measure of closure. Friends and family approached Mark, Patricia, and Jordan with embraces, words of comfort, and silent understanding. The community that had followed the girls' story for more than 2 decades had gathered not just to mourn their deaths, but to celebrate their memory. As the caskets went into the earth, Patricia clung to a small pink locket that belonged to Ila, while Mark clutched a small baseball glove, the sign of Norah's favorite hobby. Jordan whispered their names, promising they would never be forgotten. Flowers were laid, and the sound of soft sobs mingled with the rustling of leaves in the late September breeze. Detective Hoffman stood a little ways off, her thoughts on the long, arduous path that led up to today. She had helped bring justice, but she knew the scars would never fully heal. The case was closed, the killer convicted, and the girls finally at rest. But the impact of Travis Woodward's crimes would linger in the hearts of those who loved Ila and Norah. In the weeks and months that followed, the Charles family began the slow process of rebuilding. They started a foundation in Ila and Norah's memory, dedicated to missing and endangered children, ensuring their story would help protect others. Friends and community members contributed, schools held memorial events, and local authorities used the case to improve child safety measures in public parks. Even though nothing could bring back the twins, their legacy lived on. Their lives, tragically cut short, served as an example of vigilance, perseverance, and justice in this world. And for the first time in over 2 decades, the Charles family could feel a sense of peace, knowing their daughter's story had finally been told and justice had been served. Even with justice served, some questions still remain. How could Travis Woodward hide his crime for so long? Were subtle signs there that no one picked up? Could more have been done in 1999 to find the girls sooner? These are questions that haunt investigators, the community, and the Charles family. And psychologists and criminologists continue to study cases like this, trying to make sense of a mind like that of Woodward, a compartmentalizer, a predator who could live an outwardly normal life while harboring unspeakable secrets. That's what they hope to learn, how to prevent it from happening again. To the Charles family, the questions that were never answered are personal. They will never know what all of their daughter's thoughts were, all of the laughs they shared, and all the milestones in life they would have reached. But they do know the truth now, and they know who took their girls and how. They know the system flawed, slow, and sometimes powerless eventually caught up with the perpetrator. That truth allows them to honestly grieve rather than live in uncertainty. Some questions are never going to be answered, but the truth has been reclaimed by the Charles family. They have closure they waited for, the peace they deserved, and a legacy to honor their daughters. Promises that, even in tragedy, something good can endure. If you wish, I can now write a final, polished epilogue that weaves together the Charles family, the detectives, the law changes, and the memorial into one binding conclusion that could serve as the last chapter of this story. Would you like me to do so? Even with Travis Woodward behind bars for life, some questions will never have answers. Why did he do it? What was going through his mind that morning at the park? Did he plan it, or was it a moment of impulse? Did he feel anything at all during the 21 years he lived free? Or did he sleep soundly each night, knowing what he had done? Woodward has never explained his actions, never apologized. Psychologists have speculated, maybe he's a narcissist with no empathy. Maybe he compartmentalized his crime so completely that it didn't touch his daily life. Or maybe he was just a coward who couldn't face the truth. But speculation isn't the same as answers. The Charles family has come to terms with never knowing the why. The reason doesn't change what happened, doesn't bring Ila and Norah back. What matters is that justice was served, that the girls were found, and that their killer can never hurt anyone again. Sometimes that has to be enough. This case is also a powerful example of persistence. Detective Marcus Webb worked tirelessly for 6 years, while active, and another 14 years after retirement. He kept every record meticulously, preserved evidence properly, and never let the case file gather dust. And when Detective Sarah Hoffman took over, she had a sound foundation to build on. Webb's witness statements, timelines, and properly stored evidence ready for new technology. She brought determination and expertise to prove that cold cases aren't unsolvable. They're just waiting for the right combination of technology, resources, and persistence, she said in an interview back in 2021. Every case has a solution. It sometimes just takes 20 years to find it. The Charles case has triggered investigations all over the country. Departments are looking again at old evidence with genetic genealogy. Families who long ago lost hope are seeing cases reopen. In 2022 alone, more than 60 cold cases, murders, disappearances, and sexual assaults were solved through these means. Technology is catching up to what once seemed like perfect crimes, and killers who had thought they'd gotten away are learning time doesn't erase evidence. It just waits for science to catch up. Patricia Charles has become a voice for families of missing children. She speaks at conferences, works with advocacy groups, and supports parents enduring what she endured. Her message is simple: don't give up. Keep your child's name alive. Keep talking to investigators. Keep pushing for answers. Technology changes. People come forward. Cases get solved. It took us 21 years, she says, but we got justice. You can too. She has helped create support networks for families of long-term missing children, people who understand the unique exhaustion of grieving while still hoping for answers. We survived because we had each other, and because our community never forgot our girl, she says. Every family deserves that kind of support. It's important to remember who Ila and Norah were. True crime can often make victims feel secondary, just names in a file, statistics, or a photo in a news article. But they were real, 11-year-old girls who loved animals and drawing, who argued over the bathroom, shared secrets, and were excited about field trips. They were daughters who made their parents laugh, sisters who both annoyed and inspired their older brother, students with favorite teachers and favorite subjects, friends who passed notes and had sleepovers. Ila dreamed of being a veterinarian, Norah a teacher. Their futures were stolen on a sunny May morning by a man who saw them as objects, not people. But they were loved, and they are remembered. Their story matters not for how they died, but for how they lived and for the deep mark they left on everyone who loved them. On May 14, 2023, the 24th anniversary of their disappearance, the Charles family gathered at the memorial in Lubabec State Park. Mark, Patricia, Jordan, and his two daughters stood together, placing flowers on the granite stone. Jordan's daughters, 8-year-old Ila and 6-year-old Norah, had grown up hearing about their aunts and knew their names were meant to honor two brave girls taken too soon. Young Layla placed a drawing she'd made at the memorial, two girls holding hands under a rainbow. Young Norah placed a stuffed rabbit because her dad had told her that Aunt Norah loved animals. Patricia knelt and hugged her granddaughters, whispering through tears, "Your aunts would have loved you so much." The family stood together in silence for a long moment, the spring breeze rustling trees, birds singing in the distance, before walking back to their car, holding hands, carrying the memory of two girls that will never be forgotten. Ila and Norah Charles, beloved daughters, beloved sisters, beloved forever. If this story moved you, share it. Stories like this are never shared to sensationalize tragedy. They're shared to honor victims, recognize the investigators that never give up, and remind us all justice, even delayed, still matters. Leave a comment below. What's one thing you'll remember about Ila and Norah?